Today, I will highlight why the removal of the Howard property from the PPU will allow the port to maximize the public value of its waterfront, including improved transportation infrastructure for expanding seaport capacity and public access to the waterfront. Since its creation in 1927, the port has been committed to serving the commerce and transportation needs of the region and the state, and indeed the world. The port devotes most of its almost 20 miles of waterfront, nearly 4,000 acres, or 6.25 square miles, to operating the Seaport in the Oakland airport. Facilities are essential to the moving of goods and people for the region. Particularly for the Seaport, the acreage of Oakland's waterfront devoted to maritime cargo has evolved both by shifting its terminal from the Oakland inner harbor to the outer harbor, and by expanding its footprint from 750 acres in 1998 to almost doubling its size for maritime to 1,300 acres today. You can see the photo from historical port to today's port. As the Seaport expanded and evolved, the Howard Terminal property, located closest to the inner harbor and adjacent to Jacqueline Square, has become too small and isolated to use as a modern container cargo terminal. As you can see on the slide, Howard Terminal is separated from the rest of the Seaport by Schnitzer Steel, a private property, and is distant from the center of the maritime operations in the middle and outer harbors. In addition to its size, location, and isolation from the main Seaport facilities, the potential for return on investment in Howard for maritime use is also constrained by shallow water depth, aging equipment, and environmental challenges. In January 2018, 5 years after the container terminal operations ended at Howard, the Oakland A's approached the port with its Ballpark development proposal that envisions a long-term reuse of the property. The proposal triggered a due diligence process at the port. A paramount issue for our Port Commission was whether the Oakland A's proposal would be appropriate given the port's commitment to growing its seaport business. The Port Commission's role is to balance industry-specific needs with its equally weighty obligation to maximize the value of its property to create jobs, to provide our residents and visitors with access to the waterfront, and to protect our environment. In that weighing of values, the Port Commission very much understands and generally agrees with the port that the port should prioritize maritime use for waterfront land in the Seaport footprint, as the maritime stakeholders and industry have urged the port to do. In May 2019, after receiving hours of public testimony, the Port Commission decided unanimously to negotiate with the Oakland A's by approving an exclusive negotiating term sheet agreement. The Port Commission incorporated maritime industry input by including two important conditions to any final agreement to assure that the Oakland A's project would be compatible with the Seaport operations. First, the port contractually reserved up to 10 acres of the Howard Terminal for expansion of the inner harbor terminal basin to accommodate the growing ship sizes that are now calling the port. It is important to note that the BCDC must remove the port priority use designation from the needed portion of Howard Terminal to allow the turning basin to be constructed, as open bay water is not a port priority use. Secondly, the Port Commission required the incorporation into the project or its EIR a set of measures, designs, and operation standards to ensure that the Oakland A's project will not interfere with Seaport operations. These are known as Seaport compatibility measures. The Port Commission's agreement to negotiate was followed by 3 years outreach to maritime and community stakeholders in supplying information to the city staff on Seaport compatibility measures for inclusion in its EIR. Then on February 17, 2022, the Oakland City Council certified the environmental impact report, which includes a comprehensive set of Seaport compatibility measures that are designed to address maritime navigation, safety, seaport access, and traffic routing, and the avoidance of vehicular conflict, including rail safety. The illustration on the slide here shows the rendering of one of the compatibility measures included in the project. This is a new grade-separated vehicular overpass that will separate trains from vehicular and pedestrian traffic. I want to emphasize that it is only after this due diligence and inclusion of Seaport compatibility measures that the port has concluded, finally, that removal of the Howard Terminal for maritime use will not impede with the operations or sustainable future growth of the port's Seaport operations. I appreciate the BCDC staff for engaging in many intensive study sessions with port staff, including questions raised by the members of the Seaport Planning Advisory Commission. I'm pleased that after much intensive investigation, the BCDC staff preliminary staff report concluded under the moderate growth scenario, the region would be able to meet demand for all cargo types. I want to emphasize that the port does not plan or foresee any need for infill of the bay for cargo volume growth. At this time, I'd like to amplify some of the information on each cargo type that the port has shared with the BCDC staff that gives added reassurance that removing Howard Terminal is not detrimental to port's ability to accommodate cargo growth. Regarding container cargo, the Port of Oakland handles all container cargo in the Bay region. The Tioga Cargo Study bases its finding on moderate growth rate of container cargo volume at an average annual growth rate of 2.2%. At this rate, the port would grow its cargo volume from today's 2.4 million TEUs to 5.2 million TEUs by 2050. However, the port has historically grown much slower at an annual average rate of less than 0.5% since 2005. That is when the port finished the development of its last modern container terminal. But even if we go back to 1998, before the port began its terminal modernization, the port's average annual growth rate was still only at 1.9%, a pace slower than the 2.2% in Tioga's moderate growth scenario. Therefore, based on the port's actual historical growth rate, the Tioga moderate growth scenario likely overestimates the future container cargo volume growth at the port and related acreage demand. You heard the BCDC staff report mention the recent question of the STT adjunct terminal yard and its future use. The use of that yard is pursuant to a long-term lease with STE for container yard and facilitated by a $19 million port investment in improvements for container terminal operations. I can assure you if this area is needed for container operations, it will remain container operations in the future. Thus, this acreage should be included in the container cargo capacity. In any case, even accepting the moderate growth scenario, the BCDC staff recommendation concludes removing Howard Terminal would not detract from the regional capacity to meet container cargo growth demand. The same is true for bulk cargo. The Port Commission has just approved a lease of 18 acres of berth 20 to 22 in the outer harbor for bulk material, which puts the port significantly ahead of the 2050 project demand. About ro-ro cargo. We noted that the port does not have any ro-ro facilities and that there are large and well-developed ro-ro facilities in Benicia, Richmond, and San Francisco. As well, Antioch has significant ro-ro capacity that serves the San Francisco Bay region, though, as staff noted, the facility is located outside of the BCDC jurisdiction. Port staff assisted in identifying additional acreage of ro-ro capacity at the Port of Benicia, as well as supplied information on why Howard is not suited for modern ro-ro terminal investment and development. We appreciate the BCDC staff incorporation of this information and the revised ro-ro analysis. Reassuringly, the region has ample acreage to meet long-term ro-ro demand. The port concurs with the BCDC staff recommendation that there is sufficient acreage to provide for ancillary uses, such as truck parking and chassis storage, under any forecast growth scenario. In addition to the 305 acres of ancillary backlands, the port and the city have specifically designated 30 acres for dedicated truck parking. I want to conclude my presentation by noting two important policy considerations that, as the BCDC staff report notes, are not factored into the Tioga forecast, but are nonetheless important for this commission to consider as part of the port's priority use discussion. These considerations are environmental sustainability and financial feasibility. I want to give a couple examples where factors of financial feasibility and environmental sustainability, including environmental justice concerns, may significantly impact the analysis of acreage availability for seaport use and cargo volume forecasting. First is the need to invest in sea level rise resilience. The Howard Terminal will be one of the first maritime locations of the port where rising sea levels from climate change will flood, beginning in 2030. Any long-term development of Howard will need to provide significant financial returns to justify investing in raising the level of the site, as well as a remediation of toxics that have been capped at the site. This slide from BCDC's Adapting to Rising Tide shows Howard Terminal's vulnerability by 2050. Only a highly capitalized and high-density development project such as the Oakland A's proposed development can provide this kind of investment. Therefore, when it is argued that Howard Terminal should be available for long-term cargo use, the feasibility of financing such a use on a relatively small and constrained site will not yield the return necessary. A second factor is environmental justice and sustainability. The Port of Oakland is situated in a highly urbanized area neighboring historically disadvantaged communities that have been impacted by port operations, especially by air emissions of ships, trucks, and trains. In this context, any cargo volume growth projection should be balanced and weighed with the impact on the environment. The Tioga report, for example, projects a strong growth scenario under which the port would triple its cargo volume by 2050. Triple. In fact, the moderate growth scenario, even the moderate growth scenario, is ambitious given such constraints on the environment. With these factors in mind, the Oakland Port Commission prioritizes planning for sustainable growth with a process that factors in financial feasibility, environmental stewardship, and principles of sustainability. The Port Commission adopted the 2020 and Beyond plan that envisions a pathway to growing the seaport with feasible zero emissions technology, including the electrification of port-related equipment and vehicles. With sustainability as a foundational principle, the port is planning not only to grow its seaport, but also to increase public access to the waterfront and add to the economic vitality for the region, all the while fulfilling our social responsibility to the community. The proposed Ballpark project, the Howard Terminal, is envisioned to transform the area next to Jack Linden Square to a regional attraction and a housing and commercial hub with infrastructure to promote both public access and safer seaport operations. Removing the PPU designation means the process of infrastructure and financial planning, securing community regional banks can move forward. The Port of Oakland respectfully requests that the BCDC remove the port priority use designation for Howard Terminal and allow Oakland and the Bay region to fully realize its public value and to facilitate the expansion of the turning basin. We're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.